If you ever fight humans in war, don't ever, ever hurt their children. You'll wake something in them you'll wish stayed buried. The alien bartender's voice carried across the dimly lit bar, thick with the smoke of burning leaves. A crowd of silent listeners leaned closer, the usual clatter of drinking and conversation replaced by the weight of his words. Greddock, the scarred veteran telling the tale, flexed his many jointed hands, the black burns running along his fingers a permanent reminder. I served in the Shrike Wars, he continued, his deep-set eyes gleaming as he locked his gaze on the human in the corner. Thought we'd have the humans whipped. They're smaller, squishier, seemed easy enough. That was until the day we went after their colonies. The room stilled. Everyone knew what that meant. You could fight a human fleet, trade shots with their ships, but messing with their colonies was a different kind of war. The human, a weathered soldier by the look of him, said nothing but watched Greetalk with interest. Greddock took a swig of his drink. Our orders were clear. Raise the outpost on Tau Ceti, take prisoners, and teach them a lesson. But there were children on that rock. And when we dragged those young ones out, screaming a single transmission escaped the colony before we wiped out their comms. He paused, letting the moment settle. Didn't think much of it. But then the retaliation came. Fast, violent. I'll never forget the sound of their engines screaming through the atmosphere like a damn storm. The memory sent a chill through the crowd. Lieutenant Marcus Talbot stood on the command deck of the Revenant, staring down at the alien world below, his fists clenched at his sides, eyes hollow with a fury that simmered just beneath his skin. We're going in, he said to the crew, his voice as sharp as a blade. Sir, Intel says it's a suicide mission, Sergeant Klein spoke, his face tight. The Shrike have fortified the colony. They've got orbital defenses, planetary shields. I don't care, Talbot cut him off. They took our kids. A murmur swept through the crew. They'd all heard the report. Children abducted. Families slaughtered. Every man on that ship had lost someone in the raid on Tau Ceti. There would be no discussion, no retreat. Talbot's eyes flicked to the viewport as the black planet spun beneath them. The Shrike believed their defenses were enough. They'd never fought humans when they had this much at stake. Prepare the assault teams, Talbot ordered. We drop in 10. The Shrike outpost was a fortress cut into the jagged cliffs of the planet's surface. Their anti-aircraft guns tracked the incoming ships, firing volleys of plasma into the sky. Explosions lit up the night as human dropships streaked down like comets, some evaporating in fireballs, but most cutting through the storm of fire like they didn't even notice. On board one of the lead ships, Talbot stood, calm in the chaos, his assault rifle clutched tight in his hands. Next to him, his team waited, silent and tense. Sergeant Klein double, checked his gear. We'll be hitting the ground hot, Klein said. We're already in hell, Klein, Talbot muttered. The ground shook as the dropship made contact. The door slid open, revealing a landscape ablaze with fire and tracer rounds. Talbot was the first out, leading his men through the smoke and rubble toward the Shrike's main defense line. His boots pounded into the alien soil as the world erupted around him. Heavy gunfire, explosions ripping through the earth, screams echoing in the distance. They pushed forward with relentless speed. Every step, a heartbeat closer to their goal. The Shrike defenders, tall, reptilian soldiers with gleaming weapons, fell back in disarray. They weren't prepared for this kind of fight. Humans didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. Talbot's team fought like they had nothing to lose. They took our kids, one of the soldiers shouted over the comms. The rest of the unit roared in response. Shrike bodies hit the ground one after another, their lines crumbling under the ferocity of the attack. Plasma bolts flew past Talbot's head as he ducked behind a piece of cover, firing 3 quick shots that dropped a group of Shrike soldiers attempting to flank them. "Talbot, shields are down," Klein called over the comms. "We've got an opening." Talbot gritted his teeth. "Push through. No mercy." The ground beneath them rumbled as explosions rippled through the enemy defenses. They were closing in on the fortress's heart, where the captured human children were held. Talbot's mind burned with the thought of what had been done to them. There would be no survivors among the Shrike. Greddick's voice grew quieter as he reached the heart of his tale. "I remember hearing our commander scream over the comms as the humans broke through. Those bastards, they didn't just fight to win. They fought like we'd ripped out their souls." His eyes glazed over, lost in the memory of that dark day. They were like animals, silent, fast, and brutal. Nothing could stop them. He turned back to the human soldier in the bar. "And when they found those kids, it was over for us. The humans hunted down every last one of us on that rock, burned it all." The human in the corner took a long sip of his drink, eyes never leaving Greddick. He set the glass down with a slow, deliberate motion. "Yeah," the man said finally. "That sounds about right." Talbot moved like a predator through the burning ruins, his team close behind. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the Shrike stronghold, and every enemy that crossed their path was cut down without hesitation. His breathing was steady, controlled. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was a reckoning. "Push forward," he yelled, ducking behind a shattered wall as a hail of plasma bolts tore past. "Klein, take point on the left. Cover our flank." Sergeant Klein nodded and signaled to a squad of Marines. They sprinted ahead, weaving through the wreckage, using what little cover remained. The rest of the team followed in tight formation, guns blazing as they advanced. Talbot's focus narrowed as he saw the entrance to the main compound just ahead. The massive blast doors stood as a final barrier between them and their objective. It wouldn't hold long. "Charge the door," Talbot barked, and 2 Marines immediately rushed forward with charges in hand. "Covering fire," Klein ordered, and the squad unleashed a torrent of gunfire to keep the remaining Shrike pinned down. Talbot leveled his rifle and fired short bursts, dropping one Shrike after another with lethal accuracy. The blast doors groaned, shaking under the impact of the explosives. With a deafening roar, they buckled inward, sending debris flying. Dust filled the air, but Talbot didn't wait for it to settle. He surged forward, his team right behind him, into the belly of the beast. Inside, the Shrike stronghold was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, but Talbot knew exactly where to go. The intel they'd gathered from captured Shrike had been clear. The children were held in the deepest section of the compound, likely being used as bait. "Watch for traps," Talbot warned as they moved down a dimly lit hallway. "They'll be desperate now." Desperation was putting it lightly. The Shrike had never faced humans like this before. Humans pushed to the brink. There were no negotiations, no ceasefire. Klein tapped Talbot's shoulder, nodding toward a closed door at the end of the hall. "This is it, sir." Talbot signaled for the squad to halt. His heart pounded. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for what they might find. He reached for the door control panel, and the door slid open with a hiss. The room beyond was dark, save for the faint glow of containment fields. Inside those shimmering barriers were the children, small, terrified, and huddled together in fear. Their wide eyes reflected the horrors they'd endured at the hands of the Shrike. Talbot's chest tightened at the sight, but he forced himself to focus. "Get them out of there," he ordered, motioning for the tech specialist to disable the fields. As the tech got to work, Klein's voice came over the comms, low and urgent. "Sir, we've got movement. Multiple contacts. Looks like a counterattack." Talbot cursed under his breath. They'd taken too long. The Shrike weren't going to let them leave with the children without a fight. Everyone, get ready, Talbot barked, moving toward the door. Klein set up a perimeter. Hold this room at all costs. The Marines sprang into action, taking defensive positions in the narrow hallway. The sound of approaching Shrike soldiers echoed through the compound, growing louder by the second. Talbot raised his rifle, the adrenaline surging through him as he prepared for the inevitable clash. And then it came. The Shrike soldiers burst into view, their screeching war cries filling the air as they charged. Plasma fire erupted, turning the hallway into a deadly gauntlet. Talbot squeezed the trigger, taking down the first, but more kept coming. "Hold the line!" Klein shouted, laying down suppressive fire. "We can't let them through." Talbot fired round after round, his jaw clenched tight. The Shrike were relentless, pouring into the hallway with sheer numbers. His men fought with a fury that matched the Shrike's ferocity, but they were outnumbered, and the enemy showed no signs of letting up. "We're getting overrun," one of the Marines yelled as a plasma bolt struck him in the chest. He crumpled to the floor, smoke rising from his armor. Talbot gritted his teeth, his mind racing. The mission had always been a gamble, and now it was spiraling into chaos. But they couldn't fail. They couldn't leave those kids behind. "Klein!" Talbot shouted over the din of battle. "We need an exit." "I'm working on it," Klein replied, his voice strained. "We've got one shot. If we can hold them off for a few more minutes, I can rig the back entrance to blow. It'll give us a way out." "Make it fast," Talbot growled, taking down another Shrike. The Shrike surged forward again, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm the Marines. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning flesh, but Talbot kept firing, his body moving on pure instinct. He couldn't think about the odds. He couldn't think about anything except the mission. Suddenly, the tech specialist's voice broke through the chaos. "Sir, the fields are down. The kids are free." Talbot glanced back at the children, their faces pale and frightened, but alive. "Get them ready to move," he ordered. "We're leaving now." "Klein!" Talbot barked into his comm. Klein's voice came back, hoarse but determined. "Almost there, sir. Just hold on a little longer." But Talbot knew they were out of time. The Shrike were pressing in from all sides, and his men were falling one by one. If they didn't move now, they'd be buried here. He made a split-second decision. "All units, fall back to the evac point. We're blowing our way out." The Marines responded without hesitation, covering each other as they pulled back toward the rear of the compound. Plasma bolts rained down around them, but they moved in. Talbot stayed at the rear, firing round after round to keep the Shrike at bay. His rifle was nearly spent, but he didn't stop, not until the last of his men were clear. Then, with a final explosive blast, the rear wall of the compound crumbled, revealing the night sky beyond. "Go!" Talbot shouted, ushering children through the breach as the Marines followed. "Move!" The cold air of the night hit like a wave as Talbot and his men poured through the shattered wall. The children stumbled out, disoriented but alive. The Marines formed a tight perimeter, their backs to the jagged cliffs, eyes scanning the barren landscape for any sign of pursuit. Talbot stayed at the rear, his rifle still trained on the smoking ruin of the Shrike compound. "Move! Keep them moving!" Talbot barked, glancing over his shoulder at the horizon. The evac shuttle was supposed to meet them here, but the sky remained empty. Klein jogged up beside him, his face smudged with dirt and sweat. "Sir, we can't hold this position long. They'll be on us in minutes." Talbot knew he was right. The Shrike wouldn't stop. "Not now." "We need that shuttle," he muttered. He clicked on his comms, trying to reach the evac team. "Revenant, this is Talbot. We need immediate extraction. Do you copy?" Only static answered him. "Damn it," he growled. Klein set up a defensive line. The Marines fell into position, creating a makeshift barricade with whatever debris and rocks they could find. They knew what was coming, an onslaught. Talbot's eyes swept over the field as he crouched beside Klein. The cliffs boxed them in. Their only hope was to hold the narrow path leading up to the breach. "They're coming," one of the Marines whispered, pointing into the dark. A low rumble echoed from the shattered compound, and moments later, Shrike figures began to emerge from the smoke. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Their eyes glowed in the dim light. Weapons raised as they advanced in tight formation. Talbot felt the weight of it, the inevitability. "Klein," Talbot said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos. "If that shuttle doesn't show, we make our stand here, no retreat." Klein nodded. "We'll hold them as long as we can, sir." The Shrike charged. The first wave hit the Marines' defensive line with brutal force. Plasma bolts flew through the air, lighting up the night as the human soldiers fired in controlled bursts. Talbot's rifle kicked against his shoulder as he dropped one enemy after another, but the Shrike just kept coming. "They're pushing hard," Klein shouted over the roar of gunfire. He fired his sidearm, killing a Shrike that had nearly broken through the line. Talbot didn't respond. He was too focused, his mind running on autopilot as he emptied his clip and reloaded. They couldn't let the Shrike break their line. If they did, the kids would be slaughtered. "Hold the line!" he yelled, his voice raw. "Don't let them through!" The Marines dug in, fighting with everything they had. Bodies piled up on both sides, but the Shrike seemed endless. Talbot could feel the pressure mounting. Their line was starting to buckle under the sheer weight of the assault. A plasma bolt clipped his shoulder, sending a jolt of pain down his arm. But he didn't flinch. He just kept firing. There was no room for pain, no room for anything except survival. "They're flanking us," a Marine called out from the left. Talbot turned to see a group of Shrike scaling the cliffs, trying to outmaneuver them. He cursed under his breath. "Klein, we're getting overrun." Klein's voice came over the comm, exhausted. Talbot fired into the Shrike flank, cutting down 3 of them before they could reach the top. But it wasn't enough. More were coming. They were running out of time. Suddenly, a loud roar filled the sky, drowning out the sounds of battle. Talbot looked up and saw it, a streak of light cutting through the darkness. The shuttle. A surge of hope shot through him. "Evac's here," he shouted into the comms. "Prepare for extraction." The shuttle came in low, its engine screaming as it hovered just above the ground. The rear ramp lowered, and 2 crew members appeared, waving the Marines toward them. "Get the kids on first," Talbot ordered. The Marines sprang into action, ushering the terrified children toward the shuttle. Talbot stayed at the front, covering their retreat as the Shrike continued to press forward. "Come on, come on!" Klein shouted, firing wildly as the last of the children were loaded onto the shuttle. The Marines followed, retreating one by one until only Talbot and Klein remained. "Go!" Talbot shouted at Klein, still firing into the advancing horde. "I'll cover you!" Klein hesitated for a split second, but then nodded and ran for the shuttle. Talbot backed up slowly, his rifle spitting fire until the last second. The moment he hit the ramp, he pounded on the side of the shuttle. "Go! Now!" The shuttle's engines roared to life, and it shot upward, pulling away from the battlefield. Inside, the Marines slumped against the walls, covered in blood of enemy. The children huddled together, safe at last. Talbot leaned back, his chest heaving as the adrenaline began to wear off. He looked out the viewport, watching the planet shrink below them. "Sir," Klein said, sitting down beside him, "we made it." Talbot didn't respond immediately. He stared at the stars, his mind still racing, but slowly, a smile crept across his face. "We did," he said quietly, "but they'll never forget this." Klein nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The Shrike had taken something they should never have touched, and humanity had shown them what happens when you push too far. Back in the bar, Gredek's voice trailed off, his tale finished. The crowd sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in. The human in the corner stood up, dropping a few credits on the counter. He met Gretok's eyes and gave a small nod. "You told it right." Without another word, he turned and left, leaving the bar in a silence thicker than before. Gredek watched him go, then turned to the bartender. "Humans," he muttered. "You never cross them. Not like that." The bartender said nothing, but the lesson hung in the air. No one messed with humans, and walked away unscathed.